So listen. Jesus is just all right with me. Jesus is just all right, oh yeah. Jesus is just all right with me. Jesus is just all right. So when the Doobie Brothers kind of brought back that and gave new life to a gospel tune in 1972, it went immediately to the top of the charts. There were some folks at the time who took exception to the song. They said, isn't that kind of damning with faint praise to say Jesus is just all right? In our vernacular and in the way we speak today, just all right is what the Irish might call passing fair. Nice, it's nice. But maybe there's a grade above Jesus is just all right. Well, I speak to you, open up this fashion to let you know of the devotion in the north of Israel at the time that Elijah prophesied, held very similar views towards Yahweh, the God, principally the God universally respected in Judah, the people to the south who lived in the south, as the one and only God. That all other gods were false; they were idols. But in the north, you see, they were very cosmopolitan. The north of the land was known as Israel, and Elijah went to prophesy and to take exception to Yahweh is not. He's more than all right. He is the one and the only God, and the God that you worship so and so in love with up here, whose name was Baal. Baal is an idol. Baal doesn't really exist. And Elijah spent his whole career banging heads with the powers that be, everyone from the king and the queen to the prophets of Baal up in the north. I say this to you, sort of break this open, because at the end of this reading today, there's a lot of killing. Do you remember how Steve finished up that reading, the last few lines? So whoever this one doesn't kill, the other one will kill, and whoever that one doesn't kill, then Elisha shall kill. The lecturer I was listening to recently said, for a good and loving God who brought forth all of humanity and is in love with humanity, and this is a history of engagement, you know what? That's a lot of killing. What is that all about? It reminded me of a question when I was teaching up at the high school, and we were going through the escape from Egypt by God's people. And we got to the part where the Red Sea parts, and the Egyptians follow God's people, chasing them in there, and then the sea closes on them, and they're all drowned. And this one 15-year-old African-American girl, she raises her hand, she said, Mr. Carroll, why did God kill all those Egyptian boys? She was speaking from her heart. So when we hear of all the killings and all of the triumph of those who believe in Yahweh in the north here, you need to understand that a long time before these stories were ever written down on scrolls or parchment, sheepskin, a long time before any of these stories were set to writing, they were told around campfires. And the Bible, in depicting stories of the escape from Egypt, they want it to be memorable. In describing how valiant Elijah was in combating idolatry, they want it to be memorable. Our own epics do as much. How many of you guys watch Star Wars? Raise your hand. At least one movie of Star Wars. Okay, that's great. So the Death Star, it doesn't, it sends this ray down on this victim planet, and it doesn't take out a house, it doesn't take out a town. The Death Star blows up the entire planet. Do you remember that scene? Just like the whole planet goes away. It's larger than life. It's meant to impress us. And so these campfire stories, as they get interwoven into the history and the telling of the history of the people. So what is historical fact and what is a campfire story? Even today, challenges biblical scholars, linguistic scholars, historians, archaeologists, trying to put things together. But our best sense is that hyperbole, there's exaggeration for effect to kind of brand these stories into your mind. That's what we're really talking about. It's emphasis. So you have to kind of remember the central point of the story, which is two things that God forbids in the context of his embrace and relationship with the people. The first one's idolatry. I brought you up, I redeemed you, you're my people. Why would you go and worship another god? Why would you hold me as second and place other gods before me? So idolatry. And the second one is indifference. Indifference. I didn't bring you out and raise you up and save your lives so that you could have hearts of stone. I didn't do that. So the two big forbids, if you will, in all of the covenant, in God's covenant relationship with the people, idolatry and indifference. And when the people were guilty of that, then God would punish them, and we wander through Elijah. He punished them with a drought. He punished them with fire from the sky. 500 prophets of Baal were slain. Elijah, at this point in his career, he's tired. He's been putting up the good fight. He's worried, he's tired, people are seeking his life. He's kind of at the end of the career and at the end of his rope. So God says, calm down, listen to me. And that's pretty much the message of the gospel. The disciples, the apostles are in the boat in the middle of the storm. It's noisy, they're frightened, it's night, they can't see any way forward. They're at the point of collapse. And Jesus comes, and the story doesn't play out until they stop the screaming and the terror and begin to listen to the calm voice of God in the middle of the storm. I think the take-home message for our readings this morning, other than we're the recipients of some campfire stories in the history of our people here, of God's people. So that's there. But beyond that is the central message. Is that things can't get better when you're in the middle of the muddle with all the shouting going on and with all of the extreme back and forth, the whipsaw and the up and down going on. Things aren't going to improve until we find that equilibrium in our center to begin to listen to the voice of God. I think the history of our last few years in society is that if somebody is shouting at you, then shout back louder. If somebody is haranguing you, then you harangue back louder. And somebody speaks to you in nasty tones, you speak back in tones that are even nastier. And I think that just puts us into the middle of this up and down in the whipsaw and joins us to the storm. We have to tease a sense of who we are and what we're here to do and who we are to be, and find God's still voice in our own equilibrium. Think of that as an invitation like a carpenter's level. Remember, used to, before lasers got invented, to find out whether something was level, you had the bubble in the middle that told you when things were on the level. And to level of find some way of, by the grace of God, keeping our own equilibrium as a meeting point and a meeting place within our day to listen to God's quiet voice, to find God in the stillness and not in the havoc and not in the screaming. The last thing that I was thinking about this week in connection with this is that in years as a family therapist, what I noticed was families would always fight about the wrong thing. I'm serious. I was an adolescent, behavioral health, and the families would come in and they would argue about what a rude and bold teenager they were raising. The kid never gave them any respect, and they wanted the treatment goal to get the kid calmed down. That was where all the tension and focus was, not on dad's drinking, not on mom's gambling. They wanted to put their energy and attention and all that, unleash all that energy into a focus that wasn't truly what was needed. And so, if our church gets embroiled, our message is to the world. Our invitation is to touch the world, to bring God's quiet voice into the world. When we decline to do that and we keep our tensions and energies focused on church stuff, when that becomes our raison d'etre, our whole cause for existing, we find these arguments breaking out in the church. We find that energy that should be out there fixing the world, when it's only released among us, we find all kinds of dissensions. Churches, like families, frequently fight and get roiled up about the wrong thing. And I share that with you because I invite you to see if you can't perhaps take a look at your own ideas and perspectives about things, to see if that might not in some ways be true of what we're experiencing as a church and in our larger society this week. But the only thing I'll conclude with is saying that we'll come back to where we started, that yes, Jesus is just all right with us. Our mission, our goal, our invitation is to live out and to express God's grace, and with God's help, that Jesus is the best thing that ever happened to us. And let us live into that day by day. Amen.